Hi, welcome back to another episode of the EV Life podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, and I'm joined by Hannah Neal.
Hi, everyone.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Of course, we have another great interview lined up today for our audience. Can you tell them a little bit about Accelerate?
Yeah, so today we talked to Matthew from Accelerate. He's the CEO there. And Accelerate is essentially an alliance for the EV supply chain in Canada. So there's a lot of different sectors across the EV supply chain, and Accelerate has a really cool interactive map on their website where you can actually see where these sectors reside in Canada and the connection between all of them in the supply chain.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat tool, and we will link to that tool in our show notes. So if you are interested in checking it out, you can find the link there. You know, this was quite an interesting conversation, right? Like, we're talking about how Canada can be involved in the EV supply chain from the very beginning. Like, we're talking about mining of the minerals for the batteries all the way down the line, right, to making the seatbelts and like putting the actual car together. So if you have thoughts on that and you'd like to share them, you can do so in the EV Life group on the AMA mobile app. You just download the app wherever you get your apps and log into your My AMA account. Click on the community tab and join the group. We would love to hear your thoughts on not only this episode, but all of the episodes that we've put out, and also just your general questions and thoughts on electric vehicles. I look forward to seeing you in the community, and let's take a listen to my interview with Matthew Fortier of Accelerate. Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you.
Can you tell me a little bit about Accelerate and what your role is there?
Sure. So Accelerate is Canada's industrial alliance for zero-emission vehicles. So we are an organization that works with critical mineral mining companies, with battery material companies and battery manufacturers, as well as OEMs. So those are the vehicle manufacturers, particularly in the passenger vehicle space, but also in the medium and heavy-duty vehicle space. And really our mandate is to figure out ways to ensure we have an integrated supply chain in this country so that Canada remains relevant in the automotive space, in the vehicle space, in the North American context, but also in a global context as we sort of transition from internal combustion vehicles to electric and other forms of zero-emission mobility.
And how long has Accelerate been around?
So we came together in 2021. And, you know, if you cast your mind back to that period of time, that was before we had seen big investments into the battery manufacturing space in Canada from companies like LG and Northvolt, and obviously PowerCo as well, so that's Volkswagen. You know, back then, there was a group of people and companies that were looking at the landscape and sort of saying, well, look, Canada's got, you know, critical minerals in the ground, and we've got an automotive sector in this country. Surely there's a way to bring these segments together so that we are, you know, remaining relevant in this industry going forward, particularly as we sort of see on the horizon the transition to electrification. It wasn't as pronounced as it is today, you know, in terms of the uptake in electric mobility in North America and globally, in Europe in particular, and in China, actually, even more in particular.
Right.
But, you know, looking back, you know, there was a group of people who sort of said, look, we have to start thinking through what good looks like for Canada in this space, because if we don't think it through, we're certainly not going to get there. And that really is what the genesis of this was. So really it was sort of a group of fellow travelers, you know, foundations and private sector companies and policymakers and researchers who sort of said, look, let's put our heads together and put something, you know, in motion that really will allow Canada to think through what good looks like.
And you're the CEO at Accelerate. Can you tell me how you got involved in this industry?
I had been working in various, you know, functions. I mean, I've been working in politics and government for a period of time. Then I worked in financial services. And then, you know, right before this, I worked for an organization called the Institute of Corporate Directors, which works with, you know, the large companies, the boards of directors of large companies in Canada to think through changes in corporate governance policies, you know, a lot of sort of ESG and future of work issues. The through line for my career really was government relations and public policy and thinking about where Canada can go next. And, you know, I'm pretty passionate about that. I do worry about where the youth of today and tomorrow are going to work and what we're going to produce as a country that the world is going to want to buy. And I think that we really need to, at this point in time, think through, all right, where's Canada going to go? What are we going to be doing? What are we going to be manufacturing? So that's really what led me to this space. And so, through a series of conversations with people, I thought, well, look, electric mobility and zero emission mobility really is something that Canada can lean into and be successful in. And so that's really what brought me to Accelerate.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I really want to dive into this EV supply chain. So can you just share with our audience, just give us a breakdown of what that supply chain looks like and all the sectors that are involved?
At a high level, you start upstream with critical mineral mining and processing. And Canada has got 31 critical minerals, 6 of which have been designated as priority minerals. So that's graphite and lithium and nickel and cobalt and copper. And rare earth minerals, which are those fairly esoteric, minerals that are mined and made into sort of magnets and motors. So you start there and you process those minerals into materials to make the metals and materials that are needed for things like batteries, and pre-cam and cathode and anode active materials for batteries. And then, you make the batteries, and the batteries go into vehicles, and of course, all the components for those vehicles, motors and magnets, and other things that are much more common. You still need a seatbelt, you still need seats,
right?
So there's a very kind of long and intricate supply chain. A lot of which, particularly further downstream in the components and assembly spaces, Canada already has, right? So the trick is to build up the upstream, that's the mining, and then midstream, which is the battery materials and battery spaces in Canada. So it's fairly long, and of course, you can input into there AI technologies and other high-touch technologies like that. So they're all part of the supply chain. And, Accelerate works with, all of those segments. We've got members in all those segments from across the country to really think through, where are we going to be successful? Where should we be leaning into? How do we sequence this?
Yeah, I just want to touch just a little clarity on the metals mining, for batteries,
Sure.
because that is such a hot topic, I guess you can say, when it comes to electric vehicles. So how many mines did you say there were in Canada?
Well, so we have 31 critical minerals that we've identified in the country, and 6 of which have been designated priority. We have a number of mines, for example, mining nickel, right? Most of that nickel is then sold to steel manufacturers. And so, not a lot of it is being kind of refined into high-grade nickel for batteries. We don't have a lithium production yet, although we've got a couple of mines that are will be online soon. We've got some graphite interests, and we've got a lot of people who are kind of, at that stage of almost commercialization, but we don't have a lot of mines just yet. And so that's a big challenge for Canada going forward. And it's not just for our industry, it's for, a lot of those kind of clean tech industries. You need all of these materials for solar panels or for windmills, but also for, cell phones and other technologies.
Right. Yeah.
And so Canada really has this huge opportunity in front of us to be mining and to be refining these materials. But we really, that's, I think, one of the big challenges of our lifetime is to get these mines online. We do a lot of work with governments to, help them think through how that's going to happen. Because, you can imagine you've got, cross-jurisdictional challenges, right? You've got to permit these things. You got to make sure that they're done in a sustainable and a sound way. You have to engage with Indigenous peoples, in every instance, and look for partnership opportunities with those peoples as well. It's intricate, it's challenging, but it has to be done.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, Accelerate has developed this really interesting interactive map online, the Zero Emission Vehicle Supply Chain Map. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So, this is a tool that we developed last year and published on our website. And we did that in conjunction with some partners, including Trillium Manufacturing out of Ontario and Engen, which is sort of the cluster for next generation manufacturing, and with an organization called Electric Autonomy. And what we did was we did some research to sort of see where is the activity in every segment of the supply chain in Canada and how has it grown over the last number of years. So we picked 2016 as a starting point because really back then there were very few companies engaged in this space, whether in the mineral space or the battery space or the manufacturing space in Canada. So we wanted to sort of track the growth of the industry. So if you go to the website, the map of Canada. It's a digital map of Canada, and there are dots, as you can imagine, and we splice it out by segment. So, everything I just described from minerals all the way down to manufacturing, and everything in between. And you can sort of see by not only by segment, but by region and by province, the activity that's grown over the last, 8 years, right? So I don't have it in front of me, but it's, starting at about $1 billion in investment to, $150 billion now. We wanted to tell a story of growth. We wanted to better understand where the clusters are developing. And we wanted, frankly, policymakers, but more so than that, Canadians to see the growth in this sector, because it is an opportunity for us to, frankly, make money as a country, like create wealth. If we invest and we develop jobs and we develop, talent, and we attract, not only attract investment from outside of Canada, but foster investment within Canada and foster those firms, then, we really could have the stickiness that you need for the supply chain. And we're seeing that, but you sort of see it in spurts, right? So there are times where it grows slowly and steadily, and then it kind of pops, and all of a sudden there are, 10 or 15 new pins on the map, and then it slows down again. But that really was the objective, is to sort of show policymakers and researchers, but really Canadians who are interested in seeing the development of this industry, that, hey, yes, it is happening, and it's growing over time, and it's creating, thousands and thousands of jobs, and it's attracting, billions of dollars in investment. So it's an accretive thing for the Canadian economy.
Yeah, it is a really interesting interactive map, and we will link to that in our show notes so that our audience can go take a look at it, because it is interesting. Also to kind of see like what industries are in Alberta.
That's right.
And how we're comparing against other provinces as well. So you shared a little bit about some of the challenges with the mining of minerals for batteries. Are there other challenges that Canada's EV supply chain is facing?
The biggest challenge, and it's the challenge that every business in the world experiences, is investment, right? So, attracting investment into your business. There are huge obstacles facing the mining community in this country, facing the battery community in this country, and even facing the manufacturing community in this country. The challenges are sometimes atypical to their industries, right? So on the mining side, you've got long permitting times, and the often quoted time frame to open a mine is somewhere between 15 and 17 years in this country. I will say that's a long time. I will say it's similar to other kind of developed jurisdictions. I'd say,
Okay.
You have to do this right and in a sustainable way, but there are ways to cut back on that time. But you can imagine if you're an investor, you sort of say, well, when am I going to see a return on my investment? If you're sort of saying you're not going to be producing something for 15 years.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. But even kind of more typically, you're also competing for investment with products and services and companies that have nothing to do with electric vehicles, right? So you're competing against AI companies, you're competing against entertainment companies. There's only a finite amount of investment around the world, and they're going to pick winners, frankly.
Right.
And so we have to set ourselves up for success in this country and sort of say, here's where we're trying to go as a country in this industry, kind of broadly defined as electric mobility. Canada can provide X percentage of the world's lithium for this market, or X percentage of the world's battery grade nickel, et cetera. Or we could, be responsible for this many electric vehicles. We could assemble this many electric vehicles. So that tells the investment community, okay, Canada is lining itself up, and I want to be part of that. So I'm going to get more and more interested in that space. So that's frankly the biggest challenge. I think even more broadly speaking, Canada still needs to figure out, as I said at the beginning, what success looks like, right? So what are we trying to accomplish in this space? It's good to be attracting foreign investment into Canada. It's good to be making batteries and making vehicles. Absolutely. But is that the sum total of what we're trying to do? Or are we trying to do more than that? Are we trying to, as I say, mine those minerals? Are we trying to make the battery materials here? And it's not just mining the minerals, just to go back to that. It's also processing them, right?
Right.
That's where the value is added. If you're just mining and exporting, there's limited value to that, right? I mean, Canada has always been the hewer of wood and drawer of water, at least in our own eyes. I'm not sure how true it is anymore, but we don't want to go back to that, right? So we want to be refining the stuff here, processing it, and then making the value-added product. So that's a big, big challenge, but it's the flip side of challenge is opportunity, right?
Yeah. So do EV owners and potential buyers of EVs play a role in shaping the supply chain?
Well, I mean, what I would say is, there's no supply without demand. So you need the demand. I think the good news is there is a real interest in these vehicles. They are really, really good pieces of technology. I think anybody who drives an electric vehicle will appreciate how good the machines actually are. And frankly, in most cases, they're better than a comparable internal combustion vehicle. They're different, though.
Yeah.
But I will say that they're really good machines. So that's a good piece of news. And obviously, you're seeing regulation at the federal level and in some provinces sort of driving demand as well, right? So incentives, but also top line. In Canada, by 2035, all vehicles rather are sold will be electric. That's the policy at the moment. Now, the thing that we need to think through, though, is where are those vehicles going to come from and the components in those vehicles? Because at the moment, they're coming from China or other parts of Asia, but mostly China, right? So China dominates the mining and the refining pieces of this. They are dominating the component side of this, from electric motors, et cetera. And so what we're going to end up driving, unless we really figure out how to make a big dent in the supply chain, and not just in Canada, but in North America, what we're going to be driving are kind of, Asia-made, mostly Chinese-made vehicles. I'm agnostic on whether that's a good or a bad thing, but it's not a good thing for the Canadian economy, right? Because we're not going to be creating wealth. We're just going to be buying foreign-made products. And so the people who are going to benefit are the dealers, and that's fine. We all love vehicle dealers, but at the same time, we want to be creating more economic opportunity in the country. So look, to your question around, can owners influence the supply chain? Absolutely, right? So we should be, in this country, making decisions on what we drive and what we buy based on where it's made, right? So we should really be incentivizing the purchase of vehicles or products that have got Canadian content in them. So that's something that we should really be thinking about, because it will benefit all of us in the long term. As going back to my original point about why I was interested in this industry, if we start buying Canadian, then we're going to be creating wealth and opportunities for our kids and our grandkids. I think that that's a really important thing to think through. I'm not unrealistic. We're not going to be buying all Canadian-made vehicles anytime soon, but we should want Canadian lithium. We should want Canadian motors and Canadian labor making these things. And so that's a real objective.
Yeah. So you kind of talk about demand, and we do know that EV adoption and demand are increasing. Is there any way that Accelerate and just all these different industries are in Canada are preparing for the impact on the supply chain in the future? As you kind of mentioned, there is a mandate that by 2035, all new vehicles sold in Canada, passenger light duty vehicles, will be zero emission vehicles. So is there anything that the industry is doing to prepare for that?
Well, there are two things that I think about. One is charging infrastructure, and two is kind of battery innovation. Regardless of what ends up happening on the policy and regulatory front, whether we're all really going to have to be driving electric vehicles by 2035 and beyond, you still see the curve increasing towards adoption. And that means that we're going to have to have a lot more infrastructure in place on the charging side. We're going to have a grid that is ready to handle that. So those are two big lifts. And you're seeing action, right? You are seeing provincial and federal funding, and you're seeing governments lean into these challenges. I think the grid side is going to be a big challenge. We've got a grid that has not been updated in most parts of this country in many, many decades in a significant way. So we're going to have to be ready for that. The good news is that, better batteries are being developed every day, right? So there's so much research. We're involved in a project right now to define a Canadian battery innovation roadmap. So where can Canada be successful in battery innovation? Cold weather, long range batteries, solid state, et cetera. Where are our best bets? But we're doing that work in Canada. There are others doing it around the world. And so you're going to see batteries increase in terms of capacity, 2-3-fold over the next number of years. And so by the time we're all kind of in an electric vehicle or a zero emission vehicle, the technology is going to be so advanced that the conversations we're having today, while valid, will seem quaint, right? Because nobody's going to be worried about driving 120 kilometers. These things are going to go so far on one charge, and the charge timing is going to be reduced significantly as well. So, but to get from where we are now to there, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of research. It's going to cost a lot of money as well, not just in Canada, but globally.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. This was such an insightful conversation, and we will link to that interactive map and also to the Accelerate website so our audience can check that out because it is pretty neat. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. I would just say, we should really be seeing this industry as a national champion industry. We have got a great track record in Canada in developing innovative solutions for the world, whether it be in oil and gas or aerospace. And this is one of those industries that we can all get behind. We can all, in every region of the country, be an important part of. And we could absolutely see Canada being a leader in the world in a couple of decades. But now is when we have to think this through and figure out what it is we want to achieve. And Alberta has an important role to play, just as Ontario and Quebec and everywhere else in the country does.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Matthew Fortier of Accelerate. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation, again, you can do so by joining the EV Life group on the AMA mobile app. And make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so you never miss an episode. We'll talk to you next week.